then.
You guys might want to mute yourselves so we don't have any conflicts on background noise and things like that.
It's saying that you will not allow me to share my screen.
Oh, hang on. Can you do it now?
It looks like it, yeah.
I can also make you a co-host, which
Okay.
I'll make you a co-host too. Great.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. Today I thought I would briefly cover kind of the importance of aquaculture and why we're in this business. I could talk all day about it, but I'll just take a couple of minutes to point out a few things. And then I'll take you through some of the other USDA ARS aquaculture research programs around the United States, with most of the focus on our facility here in Franklin, Maine. So the average American eats 15 pounds of seafood each year. The world average is around 12 pounds per person. The U.S. is the third greatest seafood consuming country, only behind China and Japan. 85% of America's seafood is imported. We're the second largest importer of seafood. Japan is first. And seafood is our largest trade deficit of any agricultural product that we have. So how can we change this trade deficit? Well, we could produce more fish, and that's what we're trying to do here in the United States and around the world, but specifically here in the United States, there's a number of these land-based recirculating aquaculture systems that are already here and are coming. And here are an example of a few. Atlantic Sapphire down in Miami, Florida. They'll have their first Atlantic salmon to sell this fall. Superior Fresh is up in Wisconsin. They have an Atlantic salmon slash lettuce program up there. Riverence is out on the West Coast. Whole Oceans and Nordic Aqua Farms are coming here to the state of Atlantic salmon. Pure salmon, they're coming to the state of Virginia. And Zealand, the yellowtail facility that's coming to Maine, and American Unagi is a facility that grows eel that's coming here to the state of Maine. So there's a lot of interest in this here in the United States. So now I want to briefly talk about the Agricultural Research Service, specifically with regards to aquaculture. For those of you that don't know, we're one of the research arms of the federal government. And our mission, everybody that works for the federal government has mission statements. And ours, simply put, is to conduct research that benefits industry while minimizing the impacts on the natural resources around. So if we look across the United States, we have about 47 full-time scientists, 10 laboratory sites. You can see starting out on the West Coast in Oregon, there's an oyster facility. In Idaho, there's a rainbow trout research facility. In Wisconsin, they used to do yellow perch. Now because the industry has changed, they do rainbow trout there. West Virginia, they also do rainbow trout. Looking at Arkansas, they do hybrid striped bass. Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, they do channel catfish as well as tilapia. And then we're located, of course, here in Maine, where we do Atlantic salmon. And we also have a work site in Rhode Island that does oyster research. So we have a lot going here in the United States, across the United States, a budget of about $35 million. And we conduct research on freshwater as well as marine systems. So if you're looking for a job in aquaculture, don't mind working for the federal government. Here are some choices out there for you. So now we're going to move into kind of the virtual tour of our facility. It's called the National Coldwater Marine Aquaculture Center. It's located in Franklin, Maine. It's kind of the central eastern part of the state. We're located on one of the bays near the ocean. So our program began in 2003. We started out in greenhouses. The building that you see here wasn't built until 2007, but now we have this 37,000 square foot building. We have the capacity to spawn every year to produce a new year class of fish. We have data on growth and selection for carcass weight for 8-year classes over 4 generations. So we have over 16 years tied up into this so far. We also do maintain a population of fish that we use as our control line. And that's what we compare to see how well we've done with our selective breeding program. So the primary strain of fish that we focus on is the St. John River strain. This fish is of North American origin. In fact, we have to test this fish through a genetic test to prove that, in fact, it is of North American origin. It doesn't come from Europe. That's expensive. We have to do it. Cook Aquaculture also has to do it. It's a law here in the state of Maine that says that you can only have fish from North American origin. We also do maintain another strain that's called the gas bay strain, and some think that that may be more adapted to a recirculating aquaculture system. That is yet to be proved, but some think that. So what we do, we have a selective breeding program, again, using the St. John River strain. It's a pedigreed family program. Selection is based on on-farm performance as well as challenge trials. Then the traits that we select for are gutted carcass weight, color, and fat, specifically azaxanthin and omega-3 fatty acids, as well as sea lice resistance, because out in net pens, sea lice are a big problem. So we have what I call 2 groups in our breeding program. One is the nucleus group, and these are all of the families in the selective breeding program. While we can hold up to 234 year class families, we only maintain about 125 to 135 families each year. It's just a lot of work to try and take care of many more than that. But nonetheless, we do have year class growth rate that we report for all the families. And then we have another group that I call the multiplier group. And these are the best performing families. They typically represent the top 10% of our group. And these fish are important because they become the brood stock for our industry partner. And looking at this little graph here, growth rate for the multiplier offspring should be higher than the nucleus. And if you follow down through the year classes, for the most part, that holds true. So these multiplier eggs, as I mentioned, are given to our industry partners. And right now, our primary partner is Cook Aquaculture. And we will provide them with 600,000 to 1 million eggs each year. Some people ask, what does it cost for an egg? And roughly the price is 20 cents per egg. And again, this is for improved germplasm. So we actually give the eggs away. We don't charge Cook Aquaculture for these eggs, so we don't get any benefits that way from them. This shows actually me strip spawning a female, and then on the right shows somebody strip spawning a male to collect the sperm. And that's pretty typical how you do it. When we have lots to do, I don't know if this video will work, but I'll give it a shot. There's another way that you can spawn these fish. You can kill the fish, let them bleed out, is what you see here on the left. And then on the right, if my video will work, we can take a razor blade and cut a hole in the side of the fish, and then all of the eggs will come out into a bucket. And it's just a lot easier, a lot cleaner to do it that way. So if we have lots of fish to spawn, we may go that route. And then we have lots of buckets, as you can see here. Each one of these contain individual spawns. And the only way to keep track of them at this point are through these white discs that you see. The disc will have who mom is, and then on the other side we'll have who dad is. And typically we'll use one male to fertilize 2 females. Then once they're fertilized, they'll go into these stacking trays here. The only real difference between what we do and the way industry does it is that we have to maintain the identities of these families. And so we'll put these individual spawns into little boxes that go into these heath trays that you see here. And then after they hatch, they're moved into this system that you see here. And as you can see on the left, that's a group that has hatched, excuse me. And then on the right is a little closer view of that family of fish. You can see the yolk sac on those fish there. And right before they swim up, we'll move them to what we call our par system. And this next slide shows our par system here. These are the 234 tanks that you'll see in this room. You'll also notice a robot with the number 2 and 1 on it. This robot goes around and feeds every tank approximately 6 times a day. And it really saves on our labor costs, because having this robot do it, they do it a lot more accurately than we could ever do it. And anyway, it's a great thing to have this robot. Another thing that I would like to point out from this picture is you'll see these inserts in each of these individual tanks. That allows us to monitor each of the families a little closer. This stage of the game, they're very vulnerable to mortality. Fungus will come and attack these fish. We're constantly treating them with saltwater dips to get rid of the fungus. And then once they get about 2 to 3 grams in size, we'll drop those tanks down, which you'll see kind of in the middle there, and we'll put lids on the tanks, and there's a lot more volume of water in each tank. And so bottom shows, maybe why we call this the par system. Once they get a certain size, we'll see these par marks develop on the side of the fish. And out in the wild, once they develop these par marks, that's usually a good indication that the fish are going to start their journey to the ocean at that point in time. So while they're at the par stage, once they get about 40 or 50 grams, which takes about a year to do so, we'll put in these passive integrative transponder tags, or commonly known as pit tags. And we'll pit tag 30 fish per family, and that's what we keep as our brood stock. And we'll pit tag another 30 fish per family that will go out into the net pens to be performance tested. And then we'll pit tag another 15 per family that will be involved in our sea lice challenges. So you can see there on the left, that's where the pit tag gets inserted, usually into the intraperitoneal cavity of the fish. They heal up very nice. I would say the retention rate is over 95%. So once they've been in the par system for about a year, they get pit tagged, and then they get moved over to our smolt room. And this is what you see here. We have 4 tanks that we use to raise these fish here. And eventually they will undergo a 24-hour salt challenge, where we challenge these fish. And you could string it out over a couple weeks, but we've found that it's just as easy to get it over with this 24-hour challenge. And then we'll monitor the chloride levels in these fish over about a month and a half to make sure the chloride levels come back down. And during this stage, we'll also vaccinate the fish with 2 vaccines. In the top right corner, for those of you that have never seen it, that's a vaccine gun. So in about approximately June 1st, somewhere between 3,500 and 4,500 fish will go out to the net pens. Cook Aquaculture will show up in a truck and take those fish out, and they're grown right along their fish, and so they're compared under industry conditions. And then we'll harvest those fish about a year and a half later. And this just shows, after about a year and a half later, they'll call us up and say, your fish are ready to harvest. And then we'll look at weight and length and fillet color and fillet fat. And these are just pictures that I've taken while we're harvesting the fish. So the siblings of those fish we keep and maintain at our facility. And so the next building that I would take you in is called our on-grow system. And in this particular room, you'll notice the tanks are bigger. There's 4 tanks here. We spread these fish out. Each fish will have about 1,000 fish in each tank, but just will allow more room to grow. And you'll notice that there's also a robot that feeds these fish as well, and that's what you see in the middle of your screen. And so these fish will stay in here for approximately a year, and then we'll move those fish out to our broodstock system. Now this room here is the largest of our rooms. This picture doesn't give it justice how big this room is. This represents only about a third the size of the room here. Nonetheless, we'll transfer those fish into these first 4 tanks that you see here, and they'll spend approximately 1 year in those 4 tanks, and then we'll move those fish to 4 more tanks that you can't see. We'll sort the fish, move them out by sex, and those that don't make the breeding value cut off, those fish will get. Actually, we donate those fish to local food banks, but we will not use those in our selective breed program. So we do a lot of sorting and getting rid of fish that we don't need. This is a male here. You can see that by the hook on the jaw. And this actually is a 5-year-old fish. We used to keep 5-year-old fish that had high breeding values, but it's just so expensive to feed these fish. We don't keep them this old anymore. Once they become 4 years old, if we spawn them, great. If we don't, we get rid of them at that point in time. So this is kind of behind the scenes that if you were here, I would show you, but this is a quick view of our recirculating system. We have 7 of these in the building itself. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of this, but in general, what you need to have is a drum filter, which you can just see parts of on the bottom right-hand corner. You have a sump there in the middle that kind of is a holding container for any of the excess water. And then you'll see 2 towers. The one on the right strips and removes the ammonia, the carbon dioxide, and then the one on the left is where we inject our liquid oxygen over, and it falls over a low head oxygenator, and then this is the water that feeds each of the tanks. And so, like I say, we have 7 of those at our facility. It's a little older. I'd like to tell you that we're able to recirculate at about 90% of our water, but in the reality, it's probably closer to about 60% of the water is what we're able to recycle. So the next room that I would take you to is our research tank room that you see here. We are able to conduct a lot of nutrition type research studies. In fact, we're the only place in the United States where you can do Atlantic salmon research. We have the replicated tanks to conduct these studies. You know, we look at testing alternative protein sources with commercial partners. You know, we might look at using yeast or algae or soy protein concentrate as replacement for fish meal. And we also do a lot of testing of what they call functional feeds to reduce sea lice. And what these functional feeds claim to do is change the taste of the mucus on the side of the fish. And by doing that, the sea lice will be less inclined to attach to the fish. I would say that a lot of that is bogus. They just simply don't work. But and then the last facility I would take you to is our lumpfish tank building, and we started this program back in 2015. And really, the reason we started this is because they're using lumpfish to stock into net pens as kind of a natural way to combat sea lice. Lumpfish are natural. They will eat the lumpfish on the side of the fish, side of the Atlantic salmon. And so the last few years, we've been interested in lumpfish nutrition, lumpfish reproduction, and you'll see there on the right, once they become sexually mature, this is a male that has turned just this beautiful orangish red color. And, our long-term goal is to start a selective breeding program for lumpfish. And in Norway, they're way ahead of this compared to where we are. They actually can select lumpfish that eat, are more prone to eating sea lice than others. And so this is just a close-up picture of a lumpfish. They're kind of interesting looking creatures. And with that kind of wraps up the tour and everything that I had intended to talk about. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Brian, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, I have one question. Why do we import so much fish? Is it due to like regulations, or there aren't enough fishermen or enough fish? What is it? You know?
We just don't have enough here in the United States. Yeah, and they can typically import a heck of a lot cheaper than what they can produce here in the United States. So I'll give you an example. Tilapia and catfish, they can import that in for about half of what it costs us here in the United States to produce it. However, there are a lot of safety concerns with the catfish and tilapia, shrimp, et cetera, We just don't do a good job of testing what is being imported, and unfortunately, that does get tested, over 90% of it tests positive for banned chemicals, et cetera. So be careful what you buy in the supermarket or get in the restaurants.
Okay, and they would say, like, say at the supermarket where it comes from?
Not always. So a little trick that they try to do, there'll be a distributor. China is good at this. They'll find a distributor here in the United States,
Yeah.
put a US logo on it, and you might think that it comes from the United States, but in fact, the product itself comes from another country. So you got to be really careful.
Thank you.
Yep.
That brought up a bunch more questions for me that maybe would address some of this. One is, just because it's really interesting, what agencies oversee imported fish? Because it's not necessarily who you think it is. So it'd be great if you could list that. It's also really interesting to understand that we export a lot of our fish, which then also tends to potentially come back to this country. So you're buying fish that was potentially caught in the US, exported for processing, and then brought back here for the marketplace. And then also there's been a really interesting phenomena in the last 5 months where the supply chain has been so disrupted that there's a lot of local product on the market. If you go to certain areas like Gloucester, like the Cape, you can go and actually buy your fish directly from the person catching the fish. And then there are also people in this space that are buying locally and also selling locally, like Red's Best is someone, and then there's a lot of other people popping up right now. But maybe you can start at the way back first question about what agencies actually look at what fish is being sold and coming as they come back into the US.
So it's my understanding that that's overseen by the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, specifically FSIS, Food Safety Inspection Service. Now, whether or not NOAA is involved in any of that, I'm not sure, but primarily it's USDA that oversees that.
I think customs as well. And
Probably customs and border as it comes in. Yeah, yeah.
I think is that Homeland Security now. It's surprising. And then the FDA as well.
Mm-hmm. The FDA is another one. Yep. Yep.
So there's a huge kind of swath of agency that oversees product coming in under the seafood category. And that I think also lends to kind of the complexity of it, that there's multiple agencies.
I'm sure, yes.
Especially when you're testing for the health and safety, that's
Yeah.
FDA. And then there's the kind of the marketplace, the financial piece of it. And then there's the import piece of it. It's really complicated, but interesting story.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I want to point out and make clear to people, that with all these recirculating aquaculture systems that are coming to the United States, I want to make it very clear to people that this is not new technology. This has been around for at least 40 years, and it's a risky business to get into. I'd like to think that we know what we're doing. However, there are things that, you know, we have backup to the backup to the backup, and there are things that you just don't predict will happen. And over the years, these facilities have gone out of business for one of two reasons, and not in any particular order. But number one, they get a disease in the facility and they can never recover from that. And number two is marketing. The market is X when they get into the business, and the market goes away. And those two things are just killers for these recirculating aquaculture system people. And so, although there's a big influx of them right now, you know, that still remains to be seen whether, you know, how long they're going to stay around. So I just want to let people know that it's a risky business.
Brian, there's a question in the chat from Lillian. She asked if you do any work on environmental remediation. And Lillian, feel free to elaborate on your question. And actually, it's kind of interesting what Lillian's a PhD student at UMass Boston. She's here from Nigeria. So she's got very specific interest.
So we don't do any of that kind of research. That's not part of what the Agricultural Research Service does. I would say that's probably done more by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and or NOAA. So that's kind of out of the preview of what we do.
Lillian, do you want to elaborate a little bit more, or on where you're going with your work?
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, I'm also a catfish farmer. You know, I know what we do here is a bit different from what we do at home in Nigeria. So being a producer, we encounter a lot of pollutions and all that. So, but as part of my research, I'm looking at a way to find ways to remediate. Currently, we do some remediation in Nigeria, but not adequate. So I'm looking at biological means of remediation. The current one I know is using chemicals, using antibiotics to control the pollutions and all that. And we end up having more pollution. So I'm looking at bioremediation techniques that we can use to handle the pollution. So I don't know where or whom to talk to about this. But since the United States do something different, maybe we have to get involved with other agencies to know how they manage it. Thank you.
So I would say that, you know, the work that you're doing is certainly important. And the closest NOAA facility that I know of to you is located in Milford, Connecticut. And I'm sure if you're looking to partner with somebody, I know that they do that kind of research down there. But like I say, that's just not what what we are mandated by Congress to do.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I know, Erwin, you're calling in from Texas. I think you're on the call. And you have very specific kind of longer term goals. Do you have any specific questions for Brian while we have him on the phone? Because you are interested in land-based aquaculture, correct? Is he there? Maybe I lost him. Oh, no, I thought he was. Erwin, is this you at 214? Maybe not. All right. Does anyone else have any questions for Brian while he is on the phone?
I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I was just curious on like the feed. Is it mostly like plant-based? Like, do you ever feed them kind of like a protein diet with like a live fish or anything like that? Do you breed those to feed them? Is that too much on the water system? Kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We buy all of our all of our fish from a commercial facility called Skretting. It's primarily a fish meal, fish oil based diet. It's very, very expensive. You know, we're talking $3,000-4,000 a ton. We do a lot of experimental diet research looking at ways to replace fish meal, fish oil in diets with, yes, plant proteins, algal meals, that sort of thing. So we do that only on an experimental basis, however. But we are very well set up to do nutrition-related research with regards to Atlantic salmon facility. We have the expertise, tank space, and fish to do it. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Brian, that's an ongoing discussion in aquaculture. Like, how sustainable is aquaculture when you're actually catching, you know, wild stock, and like how, like what is kind of the overarching view right now on sustainability and feed? And it seems like there's been a shift in the last several years on really trying to find something that is much more sustainable than it has been in the past.
I would say with regards to what we catch out in the wild, you know, we've certainly maxed that out. It's been pretty stable for the last few years. I wish I had this graph that I showed with that, but you know, it's been pretty much the same since about the mid 90s, and if anything, it's going to go down over time. But meanwhile, there's this huge need for additional aquaculture to feed people. So, you know, how are we going to make that up? Well, it's not going to come from the ocean because, like I say, we've maxed it out. So it's going to have to come from aquaculture, whether it's on land, whether it's net pens in oceans, but somewhere we're going to have to make up that deficit, and there's a huge deficit to make up. So I'm not sure if that actually answered your question, or maybe you can say it again. Maybe I got off on a tangent there.
Not really. It's more like, you know, what are the efforts right now, and how is the industry shifting to create a much more sustainable source of feed for aquaculture, where it demands, you know, an animal protein?
Yeah, so I will tell you, let's take rainbow trout. That's a pretty carnivorous fish. They now have rainbow trout that you can feed an all plant protein diet to. So that's done. We've done it. That's actually with another USDA ARS facility in Idaho. So those fish are available for people to use and buy. But there's a big push to get rid of fish meal and fish oil in the diets for Atlantic salmon as well as other species of fish. So yeah, there's a lot of grants that are geared towards that. There's a huge amount of interest in doing that. So, how long will it be? I really believe within 5 years we can get there. So.
Brian, Lillian also said she's done research working on alternative to fish meal using maggot meal, and it worked perfectly well. So there is definitely a move towards insects as a potential protein source.
There is, but the problem that I see with that is what people don't understand is it has to be something that a great big, like skredding, for example, is it easily adapted to their system? And for a lot of these products like black soldier fly, maggots, etc., while they work, they're just not very well suited to be adapted at a great big commercial feed mill. And if it can't be easily integrated into what they already have, they're simply just not going to do it. And so there's a lot of great products out there that work, but again, they're either not close to a feed mill, you can't get them there, they're in limited quantities, or it takes a whole lot of work for these facilities to grind them or whatever they need to do to incorporate into the feed. They're just not going to use them. And so that's the downside that I see with these maggot meals, soldier flies, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
I had like one more, if that's okay.
Of course.
It's kind of like a two-parter. Do any places grow like sea vegetation? Is there any need for that? And then,
so you cut out there. Can you repeat that again?
Does any like place grow sea vegetation? Any aquaculture research place? And then is there like a best fish that's overall like, matures the fastest, produces the most, that's like the best for aquaculture?
So I have one. Are you talking about seaweed, Sam?
Yeah, like if seaweed or if there's any other vegetation.
So we have a visit coming on August 4th, I think, to the building right across the woods from Brian's building in Maine with springtide seaweed. So we're going to get a little visit of a seaweed nursery and a large seaweed farm up in Maine as well. So Brian, feel free to also take that on. There's a lot of seaweed activity in Maine in particular.
There's a lot of seaweed and kelp. I never thought that I would actually go to a seaweed or kelp conference, but I did. And so it's going in leaps and bounds along the eastern seaboard, is out on the west coast, and over in the Koreans are the really ones, the ones that know how to do this. So everything that we do, we're learning from them. So they're way ahead of it than we are. But yeah, there's a lot in seaweed and kelp, and I've even eaten some of it. I see it more and more, like in Starbucks, for example. You can go there and buy a set of potato chips. You can get kelp that has different flavored salts on it. I don't know. I didn't think it was all that good, but some people like it. But yeah, so that's a big deal, this sea vegetable. The second question, which fish is most easily adaptable to be grown? And I'm glad you asked that question. I get people that ask me that all the time, and what I would tell them is probably tilapia.
Tilapia.
Tilapia is a fish that's hard to kill. They do pretty well even with poor water quality. They'll eat a thing. They're what we call an omnivore. So just about whatever you feed them, they'll they'll eat, and they grow very quickly. So that's what I would tell people is tilapia.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for anyone? No? Oh, wait, Jack has one. Okay. Do you want to say it, Jack, or do you want to type it into the chat? Typed it in. Kelp chips are pretty good. Okay, he's going to type it. We're all waiting with bated breath. You guys, because of your questions, I'm going to ask a friend of mine who works in seaweed, in particular projects with the Department of Defense in the Gulf of Mexico on using seaweed as a carbon mitigation tool. So I just emailed her and see if she'll maybe come into our class like Brian did. So, and Jack.
Great. There's a lot to be learned there. I'm learning about it all the time. That certainly is not my specialty, but I think it's interesting.
It is really interesting. I don't think the science is in on it yet, but I think we'll get there pretty quickly.
Oh, I do too. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So, oh, in the bivalve family, which is the easiest species to grow?
Oh, boy,
Be my guess.
they all have their challenges. I don't know that it's just that easy to pick one, because they all have their challenges, is what I would say.
So I can, Jack, I can talk to this later if you want, but I went to aquaculture camp at the Darling Center a few summers ago, and we spawned with a bunch of different shellfish species, scallops, clams, oysters, and mussels. And I will say that the easiest spawning we had during that time was oysters, actually. But I also think mussels are so ubiquitous and grow more easily, maybe in the wild, that they're also more sensitive to uptake of contaminants in the water as well. So that's right, a little bit of a double-edged sword. But
there's also a lot of predators too that eat them.
Right, right. Particularly eider ducks and things like that. But you do see, Brian, mostly when I see multi-species farming, mussels are always one of the species, right, that I see with multiple species. So I don't know. I think that's a great conversation to have kind of in a relaxed way. Lillian asked me if she could keep in touch with you. So I don't know if you're open to sharing your email on in the chat, and if you're open.
That's fine. For those of you that would like to email me, it's brian.peterson, BRIAN.PETERSON at USDA.gov. And once the pandemic gets over, if you'd like an in-person tour, I'd be happy to get that arranged for you.
Do you have a date for that, Brian?
Unfortunately, no. We're not fully back to work at this point in time. So I'd like to say this fall sometime, but as this thing gets crazier and crazier, I don't know. But hopefully by this fall.
Who knows? Any other questions, guys, for Brian or me? I can stay on afterwards if you. I wouldn't mind staying on afterwards to make sure everyone's where they need to be in the work. Because Brian, this is like a triple time class because it's in the summer, so like a 14-week class is condensed into 6 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So they're getting slammed with material right out of the gate.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm really grateful that you made time for us and that we got a virtual tour of your facility in Maine. Thanks to Tim Bowden, who's on the phone as well. So thanks for the introduction. I hope we can do something more in person over time.
Well, I hope so too. Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you. And it was good talking with you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. I'm gonna just stay on. I can, let me see if I can.
Thank you.